therefore very happy to have you. My name is Rudie Filon. I'm the press counselor of the delegation, and I'm responsible for press and media, but also for academic cooperation, so cooperation with universities. And one of the things that we have done in that respect is we have set up 4 EU-IJ, EU institutes in Japan, and Kobe University is in one of the consortia, always in the lead, always running ahead, and fast-moving target. So that is a little bit to situate my responsibilities here. And the third area that my team are working on is also cultural projects. Now, you may say there is no such thing as European culture. That's very good. That's absolutely correct, but we do a number of things that we do together with other member states, like, for instance, a film festival that we have in Tokyo every year, and also in some of the provinces, where we show a variety of different European movies from different European countries. Before we get into the presentation, my intention today is to give you a very brief overview of what the EU is about. And then around 3:30 this afternoon, we will get my colleague, Alexander McLachlan, who is our brand new political counselor. And he will also talk to you a bit more about the political side of things in Japan. Alexander and I know each other very well because we both worked in China before. And our main topic of cooperation in those days was right after the earthquake in Sichuan in 2008, where I was on the ground coordinating emergency aid, and he was pulling all the strings in Beijing to make that happen. So we know each other very well, and I'm extremely happy that he found the time to join us this afternoon. Right, now before we get into the heart of the matter, I think I first would like to see some hands. Who has been to an EU country? Okay, very good. Who can, and was that for tourism or for study? Study. Okay, which country was that? Germany. Okay. And the others also studied? Ja. Naja. Kunnen we auch auf Deutsch weitermachen vielleicht? Okay, we won't do that today. No worries. Okay, so the next question is, who can briefly explain me the difference between the European Commission and the European Council? Any volunteers? I can see you're dying to give the answer. Okay, no problem. I just have to get a little bit of a feeling what you know and what you don't know. So we start really from the beginning. And we ask ourselves the basic question, what is the European Union? And it is very easy to say, what is the European Union when you say what it is not? We are not an international organization. We are not an organization for international cooperation, like, for instance, the UN. We are very different from that. We are also not a nation state. We are not a kind of United States of Europe. That is also not what we are. We are actually something, the European Union is actually something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world in this kind of setup. So we are a very unique, sui generis structure. The EU is unique in that it is a family of democratic European countries that have agreed to work together on a number of subjects for peace and prosperity. I think peace and prosperity, keep these words in mind, it's about values. It's about values that we all have in common. It's about values that we also have in common with Japan, for instance. So all these countries have agreed to delegate some of their sovereignty, some of the things that they would normally be doing as individual states, so to do that at a European level, so that one body, for instance, very important thing, sorry, that one European body can negotiate on behalf of all 27 countries. So what comes to mind in that case? What is one of the main competences of the EU when it comes to negotiating on behalf of all 27. Not everybody at the same time. Trade relations. Germany cannot engage in, I say Germany, I could have said the Czech Republic, it doesn't matter, cannot engage individually in negotiations with Japan on a free trade agreement, for instance. That is something that all 27 have given to the EU, and the EU negotiates on behalf of all of them. So, but keywords, specific matters of joint interest, democratically at European level. These are very important terms to bear in mind. So when we quickly look at where we are coming from, we can see that in the period after World War II, there was devastation all around Europe. There were 70 million people killed in wars across Europe, many civilians, not soldiers, people like we all are. And it was felt that there was a strong need for peace in Europe. So with the aid of the United States, European countries began their reconstruction. There was a very important plan for reconstruction that the US helped Europe with. Anyone knows what that was? What was the name of the aid that that US gave to Europe after the war? Very good, the Marshall Plan. Indeed, that was a real turning point, and that helped Europe recover much quicker than it would otherwise have done. But it also prompted, because there was reconstruction, the economy was getting up to speed again, so there was also a vision among some very insightful politicians to look at ways to come to peace in Europe for a longer period of time. So, in 1951, the Treaty of Paris was signed among the six founding fathers of the European Union, in those days the European Community. The Netherlands, my country of origin, was one of the founding fathers in those days. And the first thing they established was a European community of coal and steel. So they said from now on there will be an authority above the 6 countries that will decide on how to use coal and steel. Why coal and steel? Who has an idea? Why coal and steel? What can you do with coal and steel? What can you do with coal and steel? Yeah, you could, but what do you need for war? You need to produce weapons. And coal and steel are essential elements for weapons. So it was the very smart decision was taken to, in fact, remove the means from the countries to produce weapons again. And that was the European Coal and Steel Community. So that was so successful that in 1957 it was decided also to look at economic integration and also to look at atomic energy application for peaceful purposes, 1957. And then that should be 1967, but I couldn't change that on the slide. Then there was a merger of these 3 individual communities into one. And then it went on, the process went on, step by step. There was the realization that further integration was needed, Maastricht in 1993, Common Foreign and Security Policy, Justice and Home Affairs, the creation of an economic and monetary union. Now this is very topical, very timely, especially now that the euro has so many problems. And that was where it all started. But you have to understand that European integration goes step by step, because of course there is one thing that is extremely important and extremely difficult at the same time, and that is for countries to say, we give a little bit of our power away to some other entity. And that is what you see now with the whole discussion about the euro. is there sufficient political will in Europe to actually say, we realize that only with more Europe, not necessarily with less Europe, we can eventually solve the problems that the euro is facing right now. And the Amsterdam Treaty, so every couple of years there was a further step in European integration. And that, the pinnacle of that was in 2009, when the Lisbon Treaty actually made a big step forward in a more democratic and transparent Europe, more effective and streamlined institutions, EU of rights and values, solidarity, security, clear key objectives, and most importantly for us as we work as EU diplomats in countries like Japan, China, the US, we are in 130 countries in the world. We have become a bigger actor on the global stage. And why is that? That is because outside Europe, the EU has been given more powers to take the lead, to push the agenda for foreign policy. Whereas in the past we were, let's say, on a kind of more equal footing with member states, now we are supposed to push the agenda forward in order to achieve new results. And therefore, the fact that we are now in a new building is very, very fortunate, because in a way it's a bit a symbol of our new role in Japan and in other parts of the world. So the Lisbon Treaty was really a major step forward with regard to foreign policy, because the Lisbon Treaty created a European external service, a real diplomatic service, and a real minister for foreign affairs, and that is Madam Ashton, and she heads the European External Action Service, of which I am a member, and many of my other diplomatic colleagues are members as well. So this was a major step forward. What does it mean? It means changes for the delegations, for sure. First of all, our name changed. We were no longer the delegation of the European Commission, but there was a new service created, which is the EEAS, the European External Action Service, and therefore we are now the delegation of the European Union as an official diplomatic mission representing the EU as a whole. So we have external representations that have become more powerful. We have been given a different status than we had before. We have a real diplomatic service, and we have the possibility for the European Union to enter itself into political agreements, because with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union has become a legal entity. And you need a legal entity in order to enter into agreements, into international agreements. So this is a big step forward for the EU. Of course, it's nice and interesting to say, okay, we have the European Union, we have the various institutions, but it's, I think, equally important to know what we have actually achieved. So let's look at that briefly. As I said, back in 1951-52, we had 6 countries that together formed, in those days, the European Community. Then you had the 3, remember, coal and steel, the economic community, and the nuclear community. So you had 3 communities that in 67 went into 1. And gradually over time, more and more countries in Europe saw the interest of joining a European community or a European Union. They saw the merits of more integration in Europe. So by 2007, we suddenly had 27 countries. And I think that shows the interest. I mean, these countries could have opted out. They could have said, well, we stay outside of the EU because we don't really see the advantage of joining this, this club. They're a nice club, we can talk to them, we can see them from time to time, but we do not necessarily want to be part of it. But the contrary happened. And there are still countries knocking on our door saying, can we become a member? We are keen to join. So there are still negotiations going on with these countries. So it shows that apparently there is something that of interest that we have to offer. And obviously, and that's a fact of life, if you are together, if you join forces, you can often achieve more than when you try to do it all by yourself. So let's quickly look at what it takes to become a member of the EU. Of course, you have to respect human rights. That is a very basic requirement. You have to be a stable democracy. You have to be a democracy in the first place. You have to have a market economy, so not an economy that is state-controlled, but there has to be free competition. And finally, you have to agree that you will comply with European law. There is a whole set of laws and regulations at EU level that apply across the European Union territory. A new country has to integrate all these laws into their own legislation. That is a huge process, very technical, very difficult, very complex, can take a lot of time, but it has to be done because you have to be part, if you want to be part of the EU, you have to play by the rules of the EU. And the EU has many rules, which is one of its strong points, because it means that whether you are in country A or in country B, the rules that apply there are all the same. And that is a big step forward. Now we come to our favorite topic, the euro. Of course, when you start creating a European economic and monetary community, the idea of a common currency is almost inevitable. You have to have something like that. So already in the 80s, there were ideas being developed about a European common currency. And already in those days, the budget of, for instance, the European Commission was expressed not in what was called euro, but in those days it was called ECU, EQ, European Currency Units. So it was already on the mind of people for a long time. Now, in 1999, it became a fact that at the level of the banks, the euro was to be used for settlements. It was still only on paper. On the 1st of January 2002, very early in the morning after celebrating the new year, I went to the bank, to a teller machine, and the Belgian francs were not coming out anymore, but suddenly there were euros coming out, and people were lining up outside, and everybody wanted to see what the new banknotes looked like. And it all worked from the first day, and it was really fantastic that on the 31st of December you would go to the bakery and buy a loaf of bread for 40 Belgian francs or so, and the next day everybody was saying, oh, that's €1.20 or 99 cents, and that changed within 24 hours. Of course, for a long time people are still converting sometimes amounts, but the euro has really become not only a household name in the eurozone, in the eventually 17 countries where the euro is being used, but it has also become a settlement currency worldwide, which is as important as the dollar. So the euro is definitely in itself, irrespective of what it is facing now as issues, in itself it is an achievement of European integration. And of course the single market, because now suddenly we have free movement of goods, capital, services and people, which is tremendous because it means that you can start your career working in Germany, you can move your business to France, and you can retire in Spain. And during all that time, you have a basic set of rules that applies everywhere. You can take your health insurance with you, and you can have your retirement paid out in Spain or in Greece or in Italy, whatever. And all that is allowed under European rules. So, to state the obvious, as a European citizen, I don't need a visa to go to the UK or to Italy or to Hungary. We have free circulation of people, and there are hardly any border controls anymore. So all these things are achievements of the European Union, of the European integration, that have become so obvious, so normal, so day-to-day for everybody in Europe, that a lot of Europeans say, but what has the EU achieved? Without realizing that the fact that they can cross the border at any time of day or night without being stopped is one of these achievements. So it's definitely very concrete. The Schengen Agreement meant, for instance, that not only the border checks were cancelled between different member states, but also that, for instance, as a Japanese, when you're visiting the Schengen area, you ask for one visa and you have the right to circulate inside the Schengen area, and even to countries like Switzerland, for instance, you can move into. So also for third countries, this has meant a step forward. Now, all these people, all these institutions, of course, are led by people. And to give you a quick overview, you have Mr. Barroso, the President of the European Commission. You have Mr. Van Rompuy, who made his very first visit to Japan last year on the occasion of the EU-Japan summit. And on that occasion, he paid a visit to Kobe and delivered what I still consider to be a very interesting speech. Very attractive, and Mr. Buzek, of course, who is the President of the European Parliament, the democratic watchdog of the EU, which has been given increasingly important competences under the Lisbon Treaty as well. So we have the European Commission, basically the executive body. We have the European Council that decides the political orientations of the EU, which then the European Commission translates into measures, into regulations, into action. And then you have the European Parliament, which scrutinizes the actions of the politicians and the executive body. One important thing to bear in mind is that after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, any economic cooperation agreement between the EU and Japan, for instance, if that were to emerge in the future, will have to find the approval of the European Parliament. That is very different from the past, where these agreements were pretty much bureaucratic accords, where bureaucrats from both sides sat together, negotiated, and agreed at some point that this was what was the basis on to settle on. What could happen now is that the bureaucrats agree to that this is an agreement, and that the politicians of the European Parliament say it's not good enough. That could happen. So it is very much something similar to the US Congress, the role of the European Parliament after Lisbon. Now, the European Commission, we mentioned it very briefly. Legislation already. Implement community policies, enforce community law. It's also the watchdog of the treaties, together with the Court of Justice. Negotiate international agreements relating to trade and cooperation. This is still very topical today. And represent the interest of Europe, not the interest of the member states. When I joined many years ago as an official in the EU, I had to sign my kind of employment contract, if you like, which said that from now on I would serve the interests of Europe and not the interests of, for instance, the Netherlands anymore. So that is very important. We all, as EU officials, we have to be impartial and independent from any national interest. The European Council. You can see here in a nutshell the way the votes are distributed. But these are the politicians who decide on where to go next in terms of European integration, in terms of financial matters, economical matters. There are many areas where separate council meetings come together on a regular basis in Brussels, or elsewhere some as well, to discuss this. And this is the way they vote. The European Parliament, 736 members, directly elected, and pushes legislation as much as it scrutinizes legislation, and also has a very important capacity to veto the budget, to say we want the budget to be more oriented this way, or that kind of expenditure we don't want. So it's a very powerful weapon, because still also in politics and in the world, money talks. So we have moved, over the years, we have moved from a regional club, 6 countries in Europe, to being a global entity. And you can see here the world leaders are all sitting together, but Mr. Barroso was sitting there as well. I'm a bit lost which Japanese prime minister this might be, but... Okay, so that's what I thought. So that is like 6 iterations ago, yeah. Okay, so the EU-Japan relationship, and then I think we can conclude. What are we doing about our relationship with Japan? First of all, we have decided already quite some time ago that the EU and Japan are strategic partners. That is very important for both sides. And we have mutually agreed that that is the case. With the stronger international presence of the EU-Japan partnership may have a stronger impact on global governance. Frankly speaking, I think we should work more together, because there are so many common interests that we have in peacekeeping, in the environment, global warming, climate change, development cooperation, for instance. The EU is the largest development cooperation donor in the world. So also Japan is giving quite a lot of development cooperation to, for instance, countries in Africa or in Latin America. And the interesting thing is that we both do that on the same basis of shared values. We try to promote democracy, we promote peace, we promote the rule of law. So that again shows that we come to meet each other again in the way that we do things. We are definitely aware of the fact that in this part of the world, Japan, come in, Alexander, please. That in this part of the world, Japan is no doubt our closest partner when it comes to shared values: freedom, democracy, and rule of law. We have many similarities. We emphasize on multilateralism. We both have an economic superpower status. We are, in terms of civilian power, we are important. We are important as an environmental actor. I already said earlier, climate change is something that we had surprisingly converging views on. And we face similar challenges that are definitely better attacked in a, you want to sit here? In a joint manner. Trade, we already talked about that very briefly. Trade is going a bit less well for the moment. We are facing issues with non-tariff barriers, government procurement, foreign direct investment. These are areas where we would like to make progress, and hopefully in the broader frame of this, of the negotiations on a possible economic integration agreement or a free trade agreement, or however you want to call it, we can make progress there. The summit was very much giving a mandate for a parallel progress of an FTA, EPA, and a binding agreement, but I'm sure Alexander will talk more in detail about that. Nuclear safety cooperation was an important area. Global challenges, we spoke about it already, regional issues, people-to-people activities. What we are doing today is also a people-to-people activity. We come together and we try to understand each other better. It's the best way for countries to come closer to each other. So, briefly, the EU in the world. A couple of things that we are doing. What I always mention to students is that the EU has its own scholarship program, the Erasmus Mundus. The Erasmus Mundus is pretty much similar to the Fulbright program that has existed a lot longer already, but it gives scholarships to students like yourselves who want to study in Europe. So look at it, look into it. It's an offer. We are promoting it worldwide. But unfortunately, in Japan, the offer is not really taken up as enthusiastically as, for instance, in China. So, and that is not just a matter of numbers. There are really not enough Japanese young students who take advantage of this offer to study in Europe. So, do take a look at it. We are promoting peace in the world on various peace missions. The environment, I mentioned it already, the whole debate on climate and energy. Development aid was also mentioned already, a very important area where we work together in many different countries across the world. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that over time the EU has evolved from a regional organization into a global organization, a world actor, really. And our expectation is that the EU's presence in the world will become even stronger now that we have seen the ratification of the Lisbon Treaty, that everything is falling into place as that. And I think with that, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I would first suggest that we move to your presentation, and I've already introduced you while you were not there. That's always better, because then I can say more freely what I really think about you. But I mentioned our joint cooperation in China. So Alexander, thank you very much for spending some time with these eminent students and their equally eminent professors today. So the floor is yours. I think you would have to, yes, because otherwise, because and while you do that, I would just like to remind you that we are live on the internet this afternoon. We are live streaming this. At least I hope we are still. Yeah, okay. If he puts up his thumb, then everything, then the sun starts shining. So that's great. Alexander, thank you to you.
Thank you very much, Rudie. Just say hello to my mother, who's watching. She's heard this all before. I hope some of this will be new to you. Thank you, Rudie, as well. I think Rudie has done a very good job of presenting you the main ideas of why the EU is in Japan, the way we're structured, the way we work, what we have in common with Japan. But it's always an interesting question for me, coming to a new country, to try and understand, not just at the intellectual level, but also at the personal level, why Europe and why Japan mean something to each other. You know, why do we have bilateral political relations? What does it actually mean in reality? So in an abstract way, we all know that the world is a big global family, that decisions taken on one continent or decisions which aren't taken on one continent can affect the lives of people on another continent. We know that although we have this very strong historical memory of how states have behaved in the past, of our own cultural heritage, of the way that we might have behaved as big powers. My country, which is the UK, had a very long colonial past. The map of the world hanging in my school was coloured pink, which showed all the areas of influence that we'd had accumulated over the years and were stepping back from during the course of the 20th century. But we need to keep alive. We need to keep questioning these ideas about how states can behave, what power really means in the world, and we need to understand properly how we are actually reliant on each other in ways which are much more fundamental than we sometimes fully appreciate. So I think my job, which is as the political counselor here, and that means my job is to try and understand how Japan is evolving as a country and try to understand the pressures on its government, what the people in Japan expect from its government, what the government is able to do, how Japan relates to other countries in the region, and how that affects our own interest in Europe. This is a job which requires of constant questioning, and it's as much about learning as conveying the idea that Europe has about how the world should look, how the world might be organized, and what our own role is in it. So it's a wonderful job from that point of view, because it's just a constant process of inquiry. And I hope to learn something from you today as well. If you have questions at the end of this presentation, please do not be shy. You've seen in Rudie's presentation, he's spoken a lot about the shared values that Europe and Japan has. And I think that's a very important reason why we are here, and it is also a very important reason why we can both be effective players in the world in sorting out the world's fundamental questions of today. Why do we think these values are important? We think these values are important not only because we have respect for our fellow man, but also because we believe it is the best way of finding solutions to difficult problems. Open debate is probably the best way that we have come up with in finding solutions to problems. Inviting people to participate in decision-making is very important as well. Being clear to your neighbors, to your friends, to the countries you're a little bit suspicious of about what you are doing. That is also, as far as we understand, that the best way we have of ensuring that we can do what we want to do while accommodating the needs and interests of other countries, and being as clear as possible about why this is a good thing for us and for you. And this is really something which is at the heart of the European project itself. Very often, the first thing that a foreign ministry official will ask, or they probably won't ask because they're probably too polite to ask, but as a European official going into a foreign ministry of a big power like Japan, they'll be looking at me and saying, well, why are we talking to you, Europe? And how are you different from the UK or Germany or France? I mean, should we be talking to you, or should we be talking to the big countries in Europe which are on the Security Council, or the big economies, or should we be talking to people who have historical friendships with us? But, what is Europe? And I think to answer that question, you have to understand how central Europe is to the countries in Europe. So the European Union, it's called a union because actually it represents a very high level of political integration between the member states, the 27 member states in Europe. And not only amongst those 27 member states, but increasingly amongst a group of countries on the borders of the European Union, which are hoping one day either to become members or hoping to be part of a broader free trade zone and to enjoy some of the benefits that this big economic and political bloc brings with it. So European politics in a member state of the European Union is perhaps one of the most important aspects of domestic politics. If you're a politician in the UK or in Germany, you spend a good part of your time traveling to Brussels debating questions which affect directly the employment, the healthcare, the social rights, and the security of their citizens. So Europe is a fundamental part of every nation's politics in Europe. And so when we come to the external dimension, when we come to dealing with our friends and partners across the world, what we're bringing behind is not only a foreign policy, but also the collective weight of common European domestic policies which affect the everyday lives of the citizens. So that is a big part of our work in Japan. We talk about migration issues. We talk about population. There's as you know, in Japan, the younger generation is increasingly in the minority, and the older generation, which I'm joining with very soon, have joined, is in the majority, and I'm looking forward to the day when people like you are paying for my retirement. But that's a similar problem in Europe. So this is one of the things that we're able to discuss. Why do we discuss it with Japan? Because we all have experimented in Europe with different social systems. Some countries are very, very generous in providing for people who are unemployed or in old age or who are sick. Others have a different balance. But all of these tell us something about how these, basic problems can be solved. The other thing that this very tight political integration in Europe means when we come overseas is that we bring a lot of weight with us. So one of the most intense discussions at the moment in the world is happening in the group of, it's called the G20, group of finance ministers. So these are basically the people in charge of the economy of the 20 biggest economies in the world. And our hope is that if these people get things right, then the chances are that the global economy will start to pick up, that more people, that people will get jobs, and this in turn will contribute to social stability and so on. So it's a very important body of people. When we have a discussion in the G20, we are represented not only at European level, but by some of our member states, but not all of them. But what the European participants at that meeting are able to do is they are able to implement the decisions of that group across a population of 450 million people. So the consensus, so when we're negotiating there, we're negotiating on behalf of a very, very large block of people. And not only are we able to feed in the ideas, but we are also able to have a relatively quick impact on the behavior of a very large block of people and a very large and important block of economies. The other fundamental idea behind the European Union is that political integration is and economic integration creates peace, basically. So, in a continent which has been the site of very, very severe conflict throughout the 19th and 20th century, in fact, throughout all our remembered history, we have found that this openness to each other, this institutionalized way of resolving disputes, and this common effort behind a common political project has actually made Europe one of the safest and most stable parts in the planet. And that in itself has been a force for world stability. So this is one of the areas perhaps we are most interested in collaborating with Japan on now. Japan has a very noble record of participating in the development, the economic development of poor countries, in particular in Africa and in the Pacific region. We also invest a lot of money in that. We are increasingly in the European Union developing our own peacekeeping forces, our own peacekeeping operations, using civilian or military means. And we have a very good collaboration with Japan, for instance, on this naval operation, this anti-piracy operation off the coast of Somalia. So these are concrete examples of how we can work together to affect the change in the world. And the third real element of why we're sort of interested in Japan and why Japan is interested in Europe is the whole regional security context. Japan, of course, has a very powerful alliance with the United States, but it's also a country which needs to be able to develop its own independent relations with big neighbors such as China. China is a big part of Japan's economy now. And China, interestingly, when I was there during the earthquake, and they were very surprised at how quickly the earthquake in Japan had an impact on Chinese factories. Chinese factories are producing Japanese goods, and 1 week after the Japanese factories stopped producing the components, the Chinese factories had to stop producing the finished goods. And that was a big wake-up call for the Chinese, who thought, well, we have all the power here because we're a big growing country and everyone is listening to us. But in reality, the reality was much more complicated than that. A disaster for Japan was very nearly a disaster for China. So Japan occupies this very interesting position, security alliance with the United States. It has, but very strong interest in having a stable political relationship with China. It needs to be able to work with Japan, with the Republic of Korea as well on very important security policy questions such as what's happening in North Korea and the development of North Korean nuclear weapons. Of course, it has an important commercial, economic, and security links with Australia and Pacific nations. So it's, for Europe, a central part of the security arrangements of the Asia-Pacific region. And the choices it makes about its political relations with China, and its political relations with the United States, its ability or not to work with Korea, the two Koreas, to solve the nuclear issue there, all affect our interests directly, because a large part of our world trade goes through the oceans surrounding Japan. And if we don't have stability in this region, we are in a mess, just as you are. So that's just a few examples of why I'm here, and why the European countries have sent me here as a representative of the European Union, and why they think it's useful that Europe is represented as well as all our 27 member states. I think I'll end there, but I'm very happy to take any questions or discuss any of those points a bit further with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Please.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your good presentation and good explanation. And my question is, in my knowledge, that some EU countries have financial problem, Portugal or Iran.
Yeah.
Greece, as for the EU, how do you support such kind of country? Yeah. This is my question. Okay.
Well, it's a very precise and good question, and it's the question that we're all asking ourselves at this moment, so it's a very well-chosen question. The way we support, first of all, you have to understand that there is a subgroup of countries which share the euro, so they have a special form of cooperation, which you might have mentioned in your presentation. There are a number of distinct issues that we're having to deal with. The first issue is the sovereign debt. So can countries afford to borrow the money they need in order to pay for the cost of government? Okay, that's the sovereign debt problem. And nearly all countries spend more than they earn. And they can spend more than they earn so long as investors believe that they will be able to repay the debt one day. Okay, so that's why we need confidence in the markets. If the markets believe that we can repay the debt, then we can carry on. We can carry on going. And if they don't believe we can repay the debt, then what you see happening is that the interest rates on the government bonds rises very, very steeply, and and soon you can't afford to borrow. And if you can't afford to borrow, you have to stop paying civil servants, which of course is a disaster, and you have to stop paying for social services. So that's why it's very important to people, and that's why you see people coming onto the street to protest. So all our efforts at the moment are going into reassuring markets, reassuring the people who are buying these government bonds, which pay for the work of government. And we're reassuring them by saying that Europe's leaders will do everything that is necessary to solve the fundamental underlying economic problems in these countries. So a lot of these, Greece has a very serious problem of debt. Other countries, when you look at the fundamentals, they're not so badly off, but for one reason or another, the markets are testing them. What we've done is we've created, first of all, we've delivered a number of very large financial packages which allow people to pay to have access to reserve funds if they need it. So that's just what we call liquidity, money in your pocket to pay what you need to pay today. The second is we've created this thing called the European Financial Stability Mechanism, which is like the IMF but at a European level. It's not quite as powerful as the IMF, but more or less that. And that is a guarantee fund. That says if at one stage you need this money, well, we have it ready and you can draw on it. So the markets take note of that. And at the moment, we're discussing taking this a little bit further, or quite a lot further, to increase by possibly as much as 4 times the amount of money available to countries like Greece if they come into difficulties. So that's at the financial level. And at the political level, this is actually pushing countries closer together. Some people have said that the euro crisis will split Europe. In fact, what we're seeing is the opposite. Countries are coming closer together because they realize that a problem in Greece is a problem for Germany. And a problem for Germany is a problem for all of us. So actually they're coming closer together and they're ready to take more decisions about the management of the economy together. So that in a nutshell is what we're trying to do. And we're confident it's going to work out. And I think we've even seen this week that the stock markets are rising on news of what's happening. Even the Nikkei is going up, so that's good news for.
The euro has gone up a bit as well.
The euro has gone up a bit, which is good news for me.
No, but it's clearly if you simply look at the size of the economy, for instance, there are parties saying let Greece just leave the eurozone, let Greece just default, because in economic terms there is not such a major impact. But that is not the point. The point is that if there was a default for Greece, the question would be, okay, who might be next? So it is very important, as Alexander said, to maintain, to restore confidence in the euro and to show that indeed politicians are prepared to do whatever it takes to keep the eurozone together. Because I think there is a kind of general consensus that, let's say, leaving the eurozone in the end would be more costly than staying in. So the benefits are still perceived as being more attractive than okay, biting the bullet. We go out, we pay what it needs, and then we are on our own again, and then we don't have to listen to Brussels anymore. It's like that, but that in general that is not seen as a viable option, because the downside is much more important than the short-term gains that may be coming from this. Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Now, Japan wants you to sign EPA, and they decided to start negotiation. By the way, EU, European Union signed FTA with South Korea before. So what was the main incentives for signing FTA with South Korea?
Well, exactly the same as they are for signing an EPA with Japan. We are a trading bloc, and we believe in free trade. What we had hoped is that within the World Trade Organization, which is a sort of global trade agreement, we would be able to develop and deepen the worldwide free trade arrangements, so that all countries would benefit equally from that. And there's been a very long negotiation called the Doha Round, which we believe would benefit developing countries in particular, but it would also benefit advanced industrial countries such as Japan too. But unfortunately, that negotiation is still going on. It's proving very difficult to complete for a number of reasons. So we thought, while that is going on, we can't just wait, and we need to find partners who are able to agree with us to reduce tariffs, so which is the tax you pay when you export or import a product, and who can agree to deal with the main sort of problems we have in advanced economies such as Korea and Japan, which are called non-tariff barriers. A non-tariff barrier is like an invisible way. It's something which it makes it difficult for you to sell your products or to invest in the country, but not because they are taxing it, but because they have some local rules which make it very difficult for you to comply with them. We used to have those things in Europe. There's a famous case of German beer. It's called the Reinheitsgesetz. And basically it was a medieval law in Germany about the purity of beer. And it said you can only sell beer in Germany if it follows this medieval recipe. And of course, people had been drinking beer in England and in Holland for centuries without ever getting ill. But they couldn't sell their beer to Germany because they said it's not pure according to our law. And that's a sort of typical non-tariff barrier. It exists, it doesn't create a tax, but it just means you can't sell your product here. So that's one of our preoccupations in Japan. Not beer. Actually, one of the pleasures of being in Japan is the beer. But those are the sorts of things. Why did we sign it with Korea? Because we are able to negotiate it. The Korean government thought it was useful to have this negotiation at that time. We were able to find a set of concessions on both sides that we were happy with. And why is that important to Japan? It's because South Korea produces the same sort of, it's very strong in the sort of manufactured goods, cars, televisions, washing machines, the same sort of thing that Japan is good at. So at the moment, Japan is at a disadvantage compared to Korea because we've cut our taxes on Korean goods. They're still quite high on Japanese, they still exist on Japanese goods. And we would like to be able to open this negotiation. But there are still big question marks among some European countries as to whether Japan is also ready to make it easier for us to invest here and easier for us to sell our goods in Japan. So that's the question that we're trying to work through at the moment. And hopefully we should have an answer to that sometime in the first quarter of next year. And once that happens, and we may well then decide to start negotiations on a free trade agreement, looking a little bit like the Korean one.
And that's an important point because we haven't yet started negotiations. We are at this moment at the scoping exercise. Yes. We are sitting together to decide what we will negotiate about. So we are still one step before actually coming to the table and saying, okay, this is the package that we want to negotiate. So we still have a few steps more to take before we get there. Next question? Yes? Let's give some advice to Japan. Yeah, okay.
Well, what I think we're trying to do in Europe, the way we've thought through this problem in Europe is to say, okay, what is the problem that we're trying to solve with renewable power? Okay. You know, why are we interested in renewable power?
Sorry, I was... You have to use the microphone.
In Japan now,
Yeah, it's
in Japan, nuclear plant
Yeah.
and problem.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's now is a chance to embracing renewable power. So, the most I think the view is that most good case.
Yeah, it's okay. I think you're right. Okay. So look, so what you've described is an environmental reason. You know, why do you want to do it? Because maybe it's better for the environment than burning coal or than using nuclear. Okay, that's one reason. Another reason is, well, where do you get your sources of energy from? So Europe it used to have a lot of oil under the sea and gas. It has much less of that. It's becoming more dependent on gas imported from Central Asia, oil and gas from Russia. So that creates a security problem. You put your heating and light in the hands of another country, and sometimes they turn off the taps. So that's also a reason, and I think Japan is also that's also a sort of consideration for Japan. So security of supply. Can you make sure that the energy that you need will be there when you need it? Environmental security of supply. The third is economic. Are we going to choose a solution which is costlier, which costs us more than our trading partners? So if one country has very cheap energy and is producing manufactured goods and can sell them much more cheaply to us than we can, are we ready to carry that cost? So that's the third question. Does it make sense economically? And the fourth question, which is one of the questions which is really extremely important to us, is climate change. So your choice of energy source, what impact does that have on global warming and on the environment more broadly? So we have to weigh all those different questions, and different countries have different preoccupations. Different countries have different priorities. Some are quite relaxed some have no problem at all in importing all their fuel from Russia because they have a good political relationship with it. Other countries have historical difficulties with Russia and would prefer to find other solutions. Some countries are relatively poor and would just want to find the cheapest source of energy. Other countries are very low-lying, like Rudie's one, and if the sea levels rise, you will all have to live on boats. So all these come into the debate, and they're dealt with in different ways. But where we stand today is that we have decided collectively that we need to reduce our greenhouse gases emissions by a very large amount. And as a consequence, and Germany has decided that it wants to abandon nuclear power. And as a consequence, there are more incentives. It's more interesting for people to invest in renewable energy than it was in the past. And I think if with European commitment to reducing climate change, Germany's and Japan's interest in scaling down nuclear power, that will probably create the conditions whereby alternative energy sources will become cheaper in the long run. They'll become more attractive. The technology will improve. And then the economic cost of changing from cheap coal to what is now expensive wind will change. So that's a long-winded answer to a simple question.
And of course, both Japan and Europe are technology developers. So the more we can put our forces together, the quicker we can come to solutions that are actually also economically viable.
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of the important things we do with Japan is a lot of research, scientific research collaboration. We also do a lot of work together on nuclear safety questions. The whole questions of what you do with a nuclear power plant when you no longer need it to generate electricity is something that we've been doing a lot of work on in Europe. So that's a typical area where we can collaborate, and we do actually work together scientifically.
Yeah. Next.
Are we?
Yeah. How are we doing for time?
Okay.
You need to use the microphone because otherwise your mother can't hear. Yeah.
Oh, we just deafened our technician. You okay?
Okay. Just speak up. We're all.
Okay. As you said before, the EU now, EU become bigger and bigger, and but of course, EU have some problem. And what do you think the most serious problem is for EU?
We're a bit at crossroads right now, in a way.
Really. Problems are for you. I'm here for solutions. Well, obviously, the most immediate question is the euro. And that's where most of the political energy is going now. I think we're all quite confident that a solution will be found to it because everybody wants a solution to be found for it. So it will happen, and then we'll move on. But that's just part of the story. If we're looking at the sort of state of the world, and this is not a particularly European problem, but the big challenge for us is how to deal with the changing patterns of power in the world. So there are large, powerful, but poor countries emerging. How much responsibility do we want? How are they going to behave? What sort of responsibility are they going to take for their actions? How demanding are they going to be on the current status quo in terms of the way the United Nations functions, the way the World Bank functions, the way all the big global political institutions work? Will big powers like the United States be able to find a new way of living with these new emerging powers? Will countries make mistakes and provoke conflict? So this is our sort of, the real challenge of our times is finding ways of communicating with each other, cooperating with each other, solving problems together, while all the old realities that we were very comfortable with are being changed, are being challenged. That is why Europe puts such such emphasis on the need for multilateral solutions to problems. We think that the more you need to have countries coming together around the table. You can't rely on countries. You can't only rely on bilateral. Two countries sitting down and solving and fighting it out. There is no problem in the world which does not affect more than one country. If you have a problem with, if Japan has a problem with one of its neighbors, it has consequences for us. We have an interest in finding solutions to it. So that is really the challenge for our time. We're living in a time when the use of force has been shown to be, even by very powerful countries, it's been shown not to be effective in creating peace and stability. We live in a time when I think no major countries are interested in threatening another or provoking conflict with another. But at the same time, we're living at a time when it'll be very easy for accidents to happen and for conflict to emerge without anybody really wanting it or planning it. So that is how I'd see the big challenge for the world.
Of course, coming back to Europe and the question about where we go with Europe, we are reaching a point where people are saying, do we really need Europe? Do we? And I think the answer to that in the end will always be, we have come so far and we can only go for more Europe than rather less Europe. There is no real way back in that sense, even though some political parties in, for instance, my country, have put the abolishing of the European Union institutions in Brussels as an agenda, as a political agenda point. But whether that is realistic, and certainly not in the light of what you just said, Alexander, I think it also shows that we need to be closer to each other, we need to talk more to each other, we need to communicate better, to see where we are going on all this, rather than to say we go it alone, because alone we don't need to bother about the others, because we have become so interconnected. The whole world has become so interconnected that whatever happens over there has consequences here. That's the reality.
Okay. So thank you very much for your valuable time for your students. Some of the students are studying the analysis of renewable energy.
Right.
Others are studying industrial competitiveness, the comparative analysis of international competitiveness of the European Union and Japan, and others are studying the euro crisis. So thanks to your very stimulating explanation, those students, I believe that students are more interested in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet you all, and thank you for your very sharp questions. Yeah.
Thank you for coming today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ah, yeah.